Brothers and sisters, what I'm about to share isn't a rumor from a neighbor or a headline scrolling past at 2 a.m. This is my testimony. Seen through these tired eyes and carried by a heart that refused to stop beating when the city tried to squeeze it still. I was standing in a fourth-floor walk-up in Brooklyn, palms flat against a peeling wall, listening to the kind of silence that follows a slammed door and a final warning from a landlord who ran out of patience the same week my shifts ran out of hours. By Friday, he'd said, and the way the hallway swallowed his footsteps told me the floor beneath me had already started to disappear. I had $27 in my pocket, a half-used Metro card, and a mother whose medicine came in bottles that sounded like rain when you shook them. Only the storm was inside her, and the forecast didn't care about my rent being late. My sister was sleeping on a friend's couch in Flatbush, 2 train lines and a river of pride away, trying to keep her little boy fed while her own hours got cut at the daycare. I told her I was fine. I told her God was good. I told her I had a plan. Truth is, I had a prayer and a stubborn streak. And sometimes those are the same thing when all the avenues turn one way against you. That night, the radiator hissed like it knew secrets about winter coming early, and the street light cast jail bar shadows across the ceiling. I counted them. 1, 2, 3, like I could measure courage in sodium orange. My phone buzzed with a notification I didn't open. People post miracles like they're coupons you can scan at the register. Meanwhile, the cashier asks for cash you don't have. I made tea I couldn't taste and stood at the window where the city keeps its throat, listening for anything that sounded like direction. A siren, a shout, a soft keep going from a God who sometimes waits until the last second to show his hand. When the notice came, it wasn't an envelope but a feeling. Not a voice out loud, but the kind that reaches you below the ribs and flicks the light on in a room you forgot you had. Pack light, it said. Hold tight. Make room. I laughed because room is the first thing you run out of when life starts shrinking. Room to breathe. Room to think. Room to pretend the bridge isn't creaking beneath your feet. But I heard it again, low and stubborn. The way truth repeats itself until you can't mishear it. Make room. So I opened the closet and set 2 bags on the floor like an altar. One for what I could carry, one for what I had to lay down. The carry bag got socks, a hoodie that still smelled like detergent and better days, a Bible with notes in the margins that sounded like me talking to tomorrow. The lay-down bag got trophies with dust on their faces, old grudges that fit too perfectly in my fists, and 3 versions of the life I thought I'd be living by now. I tied their mouths shut and felt something in my chest untie itself in return. I wish I could tell you the miracle kicked the door in right then, that the hallway filled with angels and rent receipts fluttering like doves. But sometimes the miracle starts as a clearing in the fog 3 feet of visible road, an instruction simple enough for shaky legs. Go. I wrote a note from my mother in handwriting steady enough to fool us both. Back soon. Don't worry about dinner. I placed it by her pillbox like a promise and kissed her forehead, warm and brave even in sleep. On the stairs, a neighbor's baby cried with that fierce little engine babies have.
Revving at the world as if to say, try me. It made me smile.
On the 2nd floor landing, I stopped, because a memory grabbed my sleeve the day I learned how to float at the Brownsville pool. How the trick wasn't kicking harder but trusting the water to hold you when you widen your chest and let the air come all the way in. Make room, the voice said again, and I widened my chest in a stairwell that smelled like old paint and new beginnings. And I let the air come all the way in. Outside, Brooklyn breathed in neon and bus exhaust and the kind of hope that only shows up after midnight. The corner store man nodded like he knew I was walking the kind of walk that changes a life, and maybe he did. I didn't have a destination, just an assignment. Cross this block, then the next. Keep moving until the next yes shows its face. Somewhere between the bodega and the bus stop, a woman was humming a hymn her grandmother taught her, and the melody threaded through the cold and tied itself around my wrist like a string that wouldn't let me get lost. I followed it, step by step, chapter by chapter, toward a miracle that hadn't said its name yet, but had already started to write it across the night. That was the first shift, the moment the floor stopped disappearing and started rearranging itself under my feet. Boards sliding into place ahead of each step like the city was building me a bridge in real time. I didn't know it, but by morning, an unopened message, a stranger's kindness, and a door I'd knocked on months ago were going to collide so hard they'd wake the neighborhood. For now, I walked and breathed and made room, and the darkness, for the first time in weeks, felt a little less crowded. By the time the bus coughed me down Fulton, the sky had that bruised color right before dawn admits it's been hiding the light, and my phone was a brick in my pocket, vibrating like a trapped moth. I ignored it at first calls I couldn't return, bills I couldn't pay, reminders that came dressed as mercy but felt like shame when I opened them. Make room, the whisper nudged again, and I thought, maybe the room I need to make is in my inbox. Maybe the miracle is sitting there like an unclaimed package with my name on it, waiting for me to stop being afraid of bad news long enough to notice the good. I ducked into the laundromat where the fluorescents never sleep and the machines sound like quiet thunder. The attendant nodded without looking up from his crossword, and I sat beneath the no change without purchase sign like a student waiting on a lesson. I unlocked the phone. Missed calls stacked like dominoes. A new voicemail from an unknown number. A text from my sister, "You okay?" A DM from a handle I didn't recognize with a blue heart and a please read. I started with the voicemail because it felt oldest, like bread that needed to be eaten before it went stale. A woman's voice, careful, with a city in it. "Hi, this is Renee from the Community Center on Atlantic. We met months ago at the job fair. You spoke to my colleague about part-time night shifts and a housing list. Something opened up unexpectedly. If you're still in need, call me in the morning, early. We have to move quick." I pressed the phone to my chest like it had a pulse. Months ago, I'd stood at a fold-out table and written my name down like it might evaporate if I took too long. And a kind-eyed woman had said, "We'll keep you in mind." I'd walked home feeling like I'd handed hope to a wind that didn't know my address. But hope, it turns out, is terrible at getting lost. I replayed the message until the words fit in my bones. Something opened up unexpectedly. Unexpected to us, maybe. Not unexpected to the one who tells oceans where to stop. The DM was from a girl I used to tutor at church, now grown enough to sign her messages with a period. "Hey, Mr. K, I heard you might be looking. My boss needs help prepping inventory at the pharmacy overnight this week. It's cash, and it's now. I can vouch." I laughed, the kind of laugh that sounds like a cough when relief doesn't know how to stand up yet. 2 doors cracked open in the same hour, and I only had 2 hands, but that was enough to knock on both. I called Renee first. She answered on the first ring like she'd been waiting for my voice to introduce itself to her morning. "You caught me before the rush," she said. "Listen, we have a transitional unit opening because a family got permanent placement ahead of schedule. It's small, but it's safe, and the rent is scaled. You'd need to come today. Bring documents. Bring your mother if you can." I told her thank you so many times it started to sound like a new language. She interrupted me gently. "Gratitude is welcome, but bring your ID." When we hung up, the laundromat door hissed open and a woman pushed in a cart full of blankets. Her little boy perched on the top like a prince of cotton. He smiled at me with cereal on his chin, and I remembered I'd promised my mother not worrying dinner in a note I'd written with a hand that wanted to shake. I texted my sister, "Got 2 leads. Need you to stay with May for a few hours. I'll explain when I get there. 3 dots. Then her answer, short and solid as a doorstop. "Say less." On the walk back, my feet felt lighter than my past. The city had the audacity to smell like bagels and possibility, and I let the steam from a street grate wrap my ankles like someone blessing me on the way. At the bodega, the owner slid a coffee across the counter before I could ask. "On the house," he said, eyes soft but not pitying, the way real kindness looks when it's been practiced enough to be fluent. "You look like today's asking for your best." I took a sip and nodded. "It is," I said. "I'm ready to answer." Upstairs, my mother was already awake, combing her hair the way her mother taught her. slow and careful, as if each strand had a story that shouldn't be rushed. I told her about the voicemail and the DM, about the unit and the overnight, and her eyes got that glassy shine they get when she's trying not to flood a room with what she feels. God works the night shift, she said, half joke, half sermon. Let's not keep him waiting. We gathered documents like we were building a raft, IDs, pay stubs that told a shorter truth than the work did, a doctor's note, a letter from the church on letterhead that still smelled like toner and faith. I packed a tote with her medicines and the sweater she calls her blessing. Coat because it's been to more miracles than Sunday service. As I zipped it, my phone buzzed again, this time a text from an unknown number. This is Reggie. Renee gave me your contact. I run the overnight inventory. Can you start tonight? Midnight. I pay when we're done. It felt like God conjugating the same verb twice, present tense and immediate. I wanted to sprint, but dignity prefers a steady stride. So we walked to the bus stop like people who were not running from something but toward it. The bench was still wet from last night's rain, and my mother refused to sit, so we stood under the shelter with our bags at our feet and a flock of pigeons tilting their heads like nosy neighbors. She slipped her arm through mine and squeezed, once, in that code mothers use when words would spill. I squeezed back in the same language, and the bus arrived like an answer to a question the street had been asking us since midnight. Do you trust what you can't yet see? At the community center, the lobby was already half full, faces creased by worry and years. Kids with hair asleep in every direction, a security guard who looked like he could bench press a problem and set it back down gently. Renee appeared from behind a door with a clipboard and that kind-eyed steadiness I remembered. You made it, she said, and it felt bigger than a greeting. She walked us through forms that tried to swallow us with fine print, but she slowed the flood into sips we could swallow. Answer what you can, she said. We can work with the rest. I watched my mother sign her name in loops that refused to shrink for anyone's bureaucracy, and I felt a swell in my chest that wasn't fear for once. It was room space opening where there had been none, a breath finding its way to the bottom of my lungs. When Renee handed me a key on a ring that flashed like a coin catching sunlight, I held it the way you hold a newborn, awkward, reverent, learning quickly. It's an interim key, she cautioned. 30 days. But 30 days can move a mountain if you push every day. I nodded, because pushing is the one thing I've never forgotten how to do. Outside, the day had climbed onto the city's shoulders, and the noise had grown its own backbone. We stood on the sidewalk, my mother and I, with a key between us like a bright little hinge the day would swing on. I checked my phone midnight start. Plenty of hours between now and then to move, to plan, to breathe. I thought of the stairwell lesson, of floating, of how trust is a muscle you work even when it burns. Make room, the whisper repeated, not as a command now, but as a confirmation. So I did. I made room in my pockets for keys and receipts, room in my pride for help, room in my schedule for a night shift that might just be a bridge. And as we turned toward what was next, I felt the city, for once, turn with us. The key was lighter than I expected, like it didn't yet believe it belonged to us. But it turned in the lock with a confidence I wanted to borrow, and the door exhaled when it opened, as if the room had been holding its breath for our arrival. The unit was small, 2 windows, 1 stubborn radiator, a kitchenette that looked like it learned its manners in the 70s, but it was clean. And clean is a kind of holiness when chaos has been your roommate. I set my mother's tote on the counter, and she touched the windowsill like she was reading Braille in the paint, learning the story of who had stood there before us and what they'd prayed for. We didn't have much to move, which made the moving sacredly fast. A borrowed cart, 2 bags, the blessing coat, a shoebox of pictures that looked heavier than it was because it carried faces and time. I took the bus back for the last load alone so my mother could rest. And in the quiet seat by the window I let the city flicker by in storefront sermons. We buy gold, fresh fish, open late, be kind. A boy rapped to himself at the back, soft and fierce, and I found my foot catching his beat like it remembered joy and wasn't ashamed to say so out loud. Back at the unit, I unfolded the blanket that feels like a long story and smoothed it onto the couch that would be my bed for now. My mother insisted on making tea in our new kettle as if boiling water in a new space baptizes it. Steam rose and bumped the ceiling lightly, and the radiator hissed in approval like an old auntie who's finally satisfied the kids have found a decent place. We didn't speak much. Some silences are not emptiness but gratitude listening to itself breathe. There were hours left before midnight, and still a list grew in my head like a vine. Pick up a cheap surge protector, find a lockbox for cash, call the pharmacy man back to confirm, stretch so my back doesn't betray me at hour 4, pray, always pray. I wrote the list on an envelope because paper anchors intentions better than air. And then I placed it under the magnet on the fridge like a promise I could see from across the room. At dusk, my sister arrived with her son, their laughter a weather change that warmed the whole unit 10 degrees. She took one look around, nodded as if she'd been negotiating with heaven on my behalf and had just closed the deal, then hugged me long enough to press the stress out of my shoulders. "Proud of you," she said into my ear, 5 syllables that landed like rent money on the due date. Her boy ran to the window and announced the passing cars like a sportscaster, and for a moment the room learned what ordinary felt like: a soft chair, a mother's voice, the smell of noodles on the stove, a child naming the world as it goes by. When I slipped out for the midnight shift, the hallway held a hush that only buildings know, where the pipes gossip and the elevator, even broken, remembers working. The street had put on its night face-shuttered gates, light pooled under lampposts, the moon leaning like a tired boss. I stopped outside the door and prayed, not with the eloquence of Sunday, but with the plain talk of a man about to work. Keep my mind sharp, keep my body steady, keep my spirit sweet even if someone tries me. And this part was new. Thank you for this door, this key, this chance. The pharmacy was bright and humming, a hive of labeled boxes and the soft beep of scanners. Reggie met me by the stockroom with a firm handshake and eyes that did quick math without looking like they were subtracting me. "You on time." "Good start," he said, and handed me a badge that clipped to my hoodie like a small temporary dignity. He gave me the rundown in sentences that knew where they were going. Break at 2. Finish by 5. No phones on the floor. Count twice, sign once. I nodded each yes like a nail into wood. The work settled into my bones faster than worry. Open a box, check the slip, place the bottle, straighten the label, breathe. There's a rhythm to good labor that can save a man like prayer you can see with your hands. Around 2:30, fatigue tried to negotiate terms, but I'd brought a snack and a scripture. And I fed both the body and the place in me that still forgets and needs reminding. When your eyelids get heavy, gratitude can be a lever under them. I thought of my mother asleep in a room that now knew her name, and my hands moved faster. At 4, a delivery guy with winter in his beard wandered in with 2 extra coffees he accidentally had. He left one near my station with a nod that said nothing and everything. I took a sip and felt my chest say thank you for me. Sometimes miracles arrive without trumpets, just a paper cup warming your fingers, proof that the night sees you. We finished before dawn. Reggie counted out the cash with the precision of a man who respects both numbers and people, then slid an extra 20 across and shrugged like he wasn't doing math but mercy. "You moved like you had somewhere to be," he said. "I like that." I thought of the key, of the list on the fridge, of the bus seat by the window I was about to claim, and said, "I do." He nodded, wrote my name into the next 3 nights, and didn't make a speech about it. Bless him for that. Outside, the city was mid-breath between night and day. That tender seam when the bakery dew mixes with last night's rain and makes the air smell like beginnings. I walked home with my hood up and my head clear, and every traffic light felt timed to my steps. Like Brooklyn had decided to escort me this one time without playing its usual games. Upstairs, the door received the key without complaint, and I stood for a moment in the dark listening to the unit's new noises, a pipe pinging, the fridge humming, my mother's soft snore like a lullaby she forgot to stop singing. I placed the cash in the lockbox I'd bought on the way, tucked it under the sink behind the cleaner like a secret I planned to turn into a testimony, and then I wrote 2 words at the bottom of the list on the fridge: keep going. Before sleep took me, I realized the miracle hadn't swooped in like a caped hero. It had arrived as a sequence message: key, shift, coffee, cash, dawn. A chain strong enough to hold a family if we gripped it together. And there, in the thin blue light of almost morning, I made a quiet vow to the one who'd threaded it all: I'll keep making room. You keep sending the next piece. Morning came with the soft clatter of the heat waking up and a streak of sunlight laying a gold stripe across the floor like someone had underlined the day. I woke on the couch with work still in my wrists and purpose in my legs. And for once the first thought wasn't a knot in my stomach, but a string pulling me forward. Documents. Follow-ups, finish the intake, call utilities, stack the nights. The list on the fridge had grown teeth while I slept and was ready to bite into the day with me. My mother shuffled out in her blessing coat like it was armor, and she smiled a quiet smile that said more than words ever could. We're still here. We ate oatmeal that tasted like progress and made a plan as neat as we could write it. She'd meet with the centers. Nurse about her med schedule. I'd take the A to J and double back to handle the ID photocopies, proof of address, the social worker appointment, and stop by church for a letter update with the new unit listed. Brooklyn likes to test your choreography with delays and detours, but when you've got a reason to move, even the long way can feel like a dance. I kissed my mother's forehead, tucked the folder under my arm like a playbook, and headed out into a hallway that already felt a little more ours. At the center, Renee met me with that quick step that means she has 3 fires to put out and chooses to smile anyway. You're back, she said. And I heard the subtext: some people don't return because hope is a muscle and it aches after the first use. I'm not going anywhere, I answered, laying the folder flat so the corners wouldn't curl. We went page by page, proof of income light as a whisper, benefit forms that read like riddles, emergency contacts who will actually pick up. Whenever I didn't have something, she wrote a note in the margin: pending verify. That word felt like mercy to me. It left the door open and asked me to walk through it soon. There's a particular holiness in rooms where people are trying clipboards, strollers, the rustle of plastic bags carrying all that matters. A man across from me taught his daughter to spell her name on the back of an envelope while he waited. Her letters were tall and wobbly and fearless, like brand new faith. I borrowed that courage, squared my shoulders, and signed where the lines told me to. When Renee handed me a stapled packet labeled Next Steps, I didn't flinch. Steps were exactly what I had. I stopped by church on the way back, the sanctuary empty except for the sunlight making stained glass promises on the pews. Pastor was in his office with his sleeves rolled and the look of a man who keeps spare hope in his desk drawer. He printed a fresh letter with a new address, signed it with that slow, careful signature that refuses to rush blessing, then looked me in the eyes the way a doctor listens to a heartbeat. You need anything else? He asked, and I knew he meant more than paper. Pray me steady, I said. He nodded. Done. Sometimes the strongest help is invisible but heavy in your pocket. By afternoon, I was back at the unit, spread at the counter like a one-man admin department, paper clipped, filed, texted confirmations, calendar reminders pinged like polite taps on the shoulder. I set the lockbox on the table and counted last night's cash again, not because I didn't trust the number, but because gratitude likes to touch what it thanks. Then I made a Rule 3 piles: rent, medicine, travel. No pile borrows from the others without permission and prayer. I wrote the amounts with a steady pen and felt a steadier man looking back at me from inside my ribs. My sister dropped by after work with a bag of groceries you could build a week from: rice, beans, eggs, greens, and a treat she pretended was on sale. We cooked like people who'd been hungry and decided never to lie about that again. And while the onions taught the room how to smell like home, her little boy lined up toy cars on the windowsill and named them after streets he loved. This one is Flatbush. This one is Church. This one is Nostrand. he narrated, and I realized we were building a city inside a room. Routes, stops, familiar turns. In the evening, I walked my mother down the block slow, letting the neighborhood introduce itself properly now that it might be hours longer than a weekend. The lady with the plastic-covered couch waved from her window, the barber flicked hair from his cape like confetti, and the deli cat did his rounds like a small security guard with no days off. We picked up a few things, a cheap lamp that would make the bedroom kinder, a dish rack because dishes are proof, and a little ficus with stubborn leaves. Plants make a room remember to breathe, my mother said, and we both laughed at how wise and ridiculous that sounded at the same time. Night came like it always does, on time and full of tests, but I felt different facing it. The second shift was waiting, and I suited up in the same hoodie, the badge clipped like a promise kept. Before I left, I taped a new page to the fridge. House rules? It had 3 lines. 1. We say what we need. 2. We keep our peace. 3. We make room. I underlined the third because repetition is how a lesson becomes a life. On the sidewalk, I passed a man arguing with yesterday, and I knew that feeling too well to judge it. I kept walking, whispering a prayer for both of us, that tomorrow would show up early and put a hand on our shoulders. At the corner, a bus side opened like it was tired of keeping me waiting. I climbed aboard and sat by the window again, the city unspooling in reflections. And I let myself imagine farther than I usually allow 2 months paid ahead, my mother's pillbox steady, a proper bed frame for me. Maybe even a cheap rug that tricks the feet into forgetting the floor is borrowed. I didn't cling to the picture. I just let it visit, then waved as it left me with a lighter heart. The shift ran smoother, fewer questions, faster hands. A body learning how to pace itself without burning the future to warm the present. Around 3, Reggie leaned on a pallet and asked, casual as weather, "You staying long at that spot?" I told him 30-day interim, pushing for more. He nodded like he'd been to that intersection and knew the traffic. "Keep papers tight," he said. "Folks think muscle makes it in this city. Sometimes it's paperwork." We both smiled at how true and unromantic that is. Walking home in the blue hour, I felt a different weight in my backpack, not just cash and a letter, but a rhythm taking shape. Mornings for building, nights for stacking, afternoons for breathing and being a son, a brother, an uncle who could show up on time. The key turned smoother, like the lock had grown fond of me. And when the door opened, the room lifted its head like a dog recognizing footsteps. I stood there a moment, listening to the plant quietly photosynthesizing, the new lamp making a soft lake of light, the refrigerator steady as a drum. It wasn't much. It was everything. Before sleep, I added one more line to the house rules small print, a footnote, really? When help knocks, open. I underlined it twice, then closed my eyes and pictured doors, ones I'd knock on tomorrow, ones I hadn't seen yet, ones already swinging toward me because somewhere, someone wrote my name on a list and decided I was worth the call. I thank God for people who keep lists, for keys that fit, for forms that turn into footholds, for work that hums and pays, and for the quiet miracle of a room that welcomes a family and breathes with us until we learn to breathe easy on our own. I was at the counter with the lockbox open, stacking last night's bills into the 3 piles I swore to protect rent. Medicine, travel, when the phone rang with a number that didn't have a face yet. Something in me said, "Answer now," like a knock you only get once. "This is Rivera from Housing," the voice said, steady as a hand on a shoulder. "Your file crossed my desk. I can't promise permanence today, but I can extend your interim from 30 to 90 if you verify income by Friday and upload your mother's medical." Note: I looked at my mother in her blessing coat, knitting peace into the air with quiet hands. She didn't hear the words, but her eyes lit like she did. "Yes," I said. "Too fast to be cool. Just right to be honest. I can bring pay proof today and the note this afternoon." Rivera paused as if measuring whether I could carry what I was asking for. "Then carry it," she said. "Ask for me at the window. Don't wait on lines that aren't yours." The line clicked off and the room changed temperature, same square footage. New weather. I printed last night's stub at the pharmacy's portal, texted pastor for a scanned letter confirming caregiving duties, and called the clinic to beg for the doctor's note to wear a cape and fly. The clerk at the clinic, bless her weary spirit, said, "Swing by in an hour. I'll rush it." Meanwhile, Reggie texted, "You good for 6 nights straight? Rate bumps. Cash nightly." I typed yes with both thumbs, then added, "God bless," because sometimes gratitude needs to show its face. By noon, I was in motion, a train, window seat, folder clutched like a small animal learning to trust. At housing, the lobby chorus was already singing its rough hymn of numbers and names, but when I asked for Rivera, the guard nodded like I'd set a password to the next level. At the window, Rivera wore the same voice and her posture calm, precise, not unkind. We laid out the proof, the stub, the schedule, the letter on church letterhead, my mother's pill list, a budget that showed math behaving itself. She stamped what needed stamps and circled what needed coming back. 90 days starts today, she said, sliding a paper across that felt like an extra inhale. Don't waste them. Use them. I told her I would, and meant it enough to feel it in my feet. Outside, Brooklyn had the audacity to shine. I called my sister. She whooped and then got practical, like she does. "Okay, we meal prep tonight. I'll sit with Ma while you work. I'll teach the boy the laundry card." I laughed, the relieved kind that shakes dust off the heart. Back at the unit, I taped the extension notice beside the house rules and underlined about keeping our peace. My mother touched the paper like a relic and whispered, "Thank you," to the ceiling, which is where we address good news until we're brave enough to address it to ourselves. Before the night shift, I sat at the table with a pen and drew a map of the next 13 weeks' pay cycles, clinic follow-ups, benefits appointment, a savings target scribbled big enough to stare down fear. I added a 4th pile to the lockbox future and fed it a small, stubborn seed. Then I laced my boots, kissed my mother's forehead, and stepped into a hallway that didn't echo as much as it used to. The door closed softly behind me, like even it had learned to hope quieter and longer. 6 nights straight will teach a body its borders and a soul its exits, and I walked the edge of both like a tightrope with no net, counting breaths and bottles and blessings until the sun confessed it had been watching the whole time. By the 3rd night, the scanner's beep lived in my ears like a tiny metronome, and my back had opinions it expressed without asking me first. But there was a rhythm now. Prep, place, check, sign, sip water, stretch. Whisper a psalm under the hum of the coolers, remember why. When fatigue came to negotiate, I slid my reasons across the table. A 90-day extension, a mother sleeping easy. A lockbox with 4 piles and a future getting heavier by quarters and grit. Around 2 a.m., the door chimed and a woman stepped in carrying the kind of hurry you only see when a child is involved. "Pharmacist gone for the night," Reggie warned gently, hands up in the universal sign for not my lane. She nodded, near tears, then asked if there was saline and a thermometer, things that don't require a white coat, just decency. We found them quick. She clutched the bag like a parachute and whispered, "God bless," in a voice that made me swallow hard. After she left, Reggie looked at me, then at the clock. "Take 5, he said, even though no one had earned it on paper. I sat on a crate between racks of cough drops and courage, and I let that blessing hit me like a warm hand on a tired shoulder. By the 5th night, the delivery guy with winter in his beard knew my name and my preference for coffee, regular. He slid it across with that same nothing, everything nod. And I made a mental note to learn his name back because it matters to call people what the world forgets to. A teen stalker started that shift too, all elbows and eagerness. And I showed him the double count trick like someone had once shown me. Careful and kind, because gentleness doesn't slow work, it oils it. He grinned when he found his pace. "You make it look easy," he said. "It's not," I answered, smiling so he'd hear the truth and still want it. Walking home each dawn, Brooklyn felt like it had decided to practice softness for an hour bakery's exhaling sugar, buses exhaling patience, the sky exhaling light. I timed my steps to the green lights like the city was finally keeping time with me. Upstairs, the key turned without drama, the door exhaled, and my mother would lift her head from the pillow to check my face the way mothers read forecasts. "Good?" she'd ask. "Good," I'd say, and mean it enough for both of us. I'd tuck the cash into the lockbox, feed the future pile, and scribble notes on a calendar that was starting to look like a ladder. On the 6th night, the miracle didn't split the sky. It adjusted the angle. Rivera called late afternoon, no fanfare, just facts. Your upload cleared. Your file shows stable nights through month end. Keep stubs. We'll reassess at 60 for long-term placement. It wasn't a promise. It was a path. I wrote it on the fridge under next steps and felt something loosen in my jaw I didn't know I'd been clenching. My sister high-fived me at the door on her way into tag team care, and her boy announced he could now work the laundry card like a fad. Grown up. We cheered for small competencies like they were championship banners because in this house they are. Before I left for shift 6, I stood in the doorway and took inventory not of things, but of weather. The room felt taller. The plant had a new leaf too stubborn to stay furled. The lamp threw a warmer circle. My mother's pillbox was organized to the point of pride. The house rules page had little grease fingerprints from being read in real life. I laid my hand on the doorframe and prayed a simple, working man's prayer. Keep me strong tonight. Keep them safe. Keep the way clear. And then I stepped into the hallway. Not fearless, but fed. Not invincible, but intact. At 3 Adatum. When the body tells lies and the mind chases shadows, I reached for the words that had been carrying me since the stairwell lesson make room. I widened my chest in the back aisle by the vitamin gummies, let the air all the way in, and felt the floor slide into place beneath me again, board by board. That's how we didn't break not with one big rescue, but with 1,000 tiny agreements between faith and effort, mercy and muscle, strangers and their small, timely kindness. Dawn found me upright, counted in, signed out, and walking home with the kind of tired that feels like building. The key fit, the door breathed, and so did we. It was a Tuesday that felt like it had already lived 2 lives when I saw the paper taped to our door white. Official, the kind of rectangle that can tilt a whole room just by existing. My stomach did that elevator drop thing it does when memory shows up uninvited. But I took a breath the way the stairwell taught me and peeled the tape slow, like removing a bandage from skin that still remembers bruises. Not eviction, thank God, but inspection, 48 hours, compliance check, documents ready, unit accessible. It read like a test and a dare, but underneath the dread, a small steady voice said, "You have your papers. You have your peace." Inside, my mother was folding towels so precisely they could have stood for office, and I put the notice on the table like a guest who needed boundaries. "We'll be ready," she said before I asked, and we made a list that was equal parts housekeeping and holy. Clear the hall. Label the meds, print the stubs, stack the forms, breathe. I called Rivera to give a courtesy heads up and braced for bureaucracy, but she answered with the grace of preparation. "You're on file, you're in good standing," she said. "Keep your folder by the door. Smile. Speak in short sentences. Don't volunteer your fear." I wrote it down like scripture for city living. The next 24 hours, we turned our little space into proof. I wiped baseboards I hadn't noticed. My sister scrubbed the sink until it confessed it had always wanted to shine, and my nephew lined up his cars under the bed like troops at ease. I taped the house rules straighter, watered the plant that insisted on thriving, and placed the lockbox out of sight but within reach, like faith present, practical, not for display. At midnight I still went to work, because rent doesn't pause for nerves, and stocking shelves calmed my hands better than pacing. Reggie saw the tension in my shoulders and said, "You good?" I told him about the inspection. He nodded like a man who's walked that tightrope. "You're straight," he said. "You do things right. Let them see that." Dawn brought the kind of light that makes even old paint look honest. I brewed coffee strong enough to hold a conversation and set 2 mugs on the table, one for after, one for the courage to get to after. At 9 sharp, the knock came polite, practiced. 2 inspectors, clipboards, neutral faces trained not to reveal what they're thinking. I opened the door with the folder in my hands and the prayer in my chest. Keep us steady. They moved through the unit with eyes that measured corners and care, checked the smoke detector, nodded at the meds labeled like they were part of a hymn, asked for documents I had already queued like a magician ready with the next card. I answered in short sentences like Rivera taught me. I did not volunteer my fear. In the bedroom, one of them paused by the plant. "New leaf," she said, almost to herself. "Tough little thing," my mother smiled. "Stubborn, like us." The inspector's mouth softened at the edges, then tightened back to professional. "Everything looks in order," she said at last. "We'll file this as compliant." She wrote something on her sheet that sounded like a door unlocking 3 rooms away. When they left, I waited a whole minute before I let my shoulders come down, then laughed a quick, unpolished sound that cleaned the air. Minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from Rivera. "Filed? You're good." 2 words, a whole day's worth of oxygen. I took the second mug of coffee and handed it to my mother like a trophy, and we toasted with tired smiles that knew exactly how far we'd come. My sister arrived with sandwiches wrapped in wax paper like gifts, and we ate sitting on the floor because the chairs were busy holding our relief. My nephew announced he could spell inspection, which came out more like inspection, and we clapped like he just passed the bar. That afternoon, I walked the long way to the pharmacy on purpose, letting the neighborhood reintroduce itself as not a threat but a setting. The barber's bell sang, the deli cat patrolled, a woman watered her steps with a care that turned concrete into welcome. I bought a cheap frame and slid our extension notice inside, hung it by the door. Not as a boast but as a reminder, seen, checked, standing. On my way out, I added one more line to the house rules, smaller print, right beneath. When help knocks, open. When fear knocks, verify. Night shift 6+1 hit different same work, new backbone. The teen stalker asked how the inspection went. "We passed," I said, and he grinned like it was his win too. The delivery guy finally told me his name, Wheeze, and I said it back to him with respect so it would stick. Around 3, when the body lies and the mind wanders, I pictured the inspector's neutral faces turning to satisfied, the plant's stubborn leaf unfurling like a flag, the notice in its frame catching the lamp's light. The scanner beep kept time, and my breath matched it, steady as a plan. Walking home at dawn, the city didn't look easier. It looked possible, which is a better gift. The key fit, the door breathed. The frame by the entrance shone a little in the early light. I touched it like a mezuzah for our threshold and whispered thank you to the quiet. 7 chapters in, and I could feel the miracle not as a single thunderclap, but as a weather pattern shifting, pressure easing, winds cooperating, a forecast that finally included clearing. I set the lockbox down, fed the future pile, and slept like a man who had been measured and not found wanting. The first Friday after the inspection, I left the pharmacy with night still clinging to my hoodie and a paycheck's worth of small bills warming my pocket. And I decided to take the bus past my stop, just 1 more mile, to look at the city from a distance I could afford. Somewhere between Nostrand and New York Avenue, the bus sighed to a halt and a man climbed on carrying his whole week between his shoulders. He didn't have fare. I could tell by the way he patted empty pockets and stared at the floor like it might open and offer mercy. The driver gave him that look tired people give other tired people, half warning, half prayer, and before the moment curdled, my hand moved. "I got him," I said, and tapped my card twice. The man nodded without lifting his eyes. "Bless," he whispered, the syllable small and heavy as rent. I don't tell that to make myself a hero. I tell it because giving $2 felt like recognizing my own reflection from a week ago, standing in a different kind of doorway, hoping someone would say, "Come in." He took the seat across from me and unfolded a paper like it owed him honesty. He glanced at my badge clipped to my pocket, pharmacy in block letters, and said, "You hiring?" I laughed, not at him but at the choreography of the morning. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe I can ask." We rode in silence that wasn't awkward, just human. At my stop, I tore a corner off a receipt and wrote Reggie's name, the address, and asked for nights. Tell him the tall one sent you. He took it like a key and tucked it into his shoe, the safest pocket some days. Back at the unit, the plant had stretched another inch toward the window like it had an appointment with the sun. My mother was already up, pillbox aligned, smile patient. I put the cash into the lockbox, fed the future, then pulled out the budget page and drew a circle around a number I'd been chasing first month's cushion. Not yet, but close enough to smell. "We're getting there," I told her. She nodded like she'd already been there in prayer and had saved us seats. Around noon, the church text thread buzzed Community Day tomorrow, free groceries, coat drive, prayer table. I stared at the message and felt the old ache of wanting to be the one receiving, then the new tug to be the one handing the bag. "Let me serve," I prayed under my breath, not as a bargain but as a thank you shaped like action. I texted back, "Put me on setup and breakdown." Pastor sent a thumbs up and a heart, and I smiled at how even emojis can lay hands on a day and bless it. In the afternoon, Rivera called not with a crisis, but with a question that sounded suspiciously like favor. "A long-term unit is opening in the building next door," she said, words measured, as if she didn't want to spook the opportunity. "It's competitive. I can flag your file if you can bring a letter of employment, 3 stubs, and a note from the clinic confirming care responsibilities. Can you assemble by Monday?" I looked at the folder bulging with exactly the things last month would have swallowed whole and said, "Yes, ma'am," with the confidence of a man who finally owns a stapler and a testimony. "Then assemble," she said, "and breathe." Evening brought my sister and her boy, both loud with good news she'd picked up extra hours. He'd learned to tie his shoes fast. We ate simple food that tasted like a raise, and after dishes, I taught my nephew how to water the plant just until the soil turned dark, not more, not less. "Plants are like people," I said without meaning to be profound. "They don't need everything, just enough and on time." He nodded solemnly and then asked if he could feed the future pile with 2 quarters he'd earned for chores. I almost said no, he's a kid, but he looked so serious that I opened the lockbox, and we slid the coins in together like a ceremony. "Now it's ours," he said. "It was always ours," I answered, surprised by my own voice. Before the night shift, I walked the block with my mother. The lady with the plastic-covered couch waved again. We waved back like new neighbors with old souls. A man I recognized from the bus stop nodded and said, "Inspection go smooth?" "Word travels where hope has lived." "Smooth," I said. "Thank God." He echoed it like a benediction. At the corner, a flyer flapped on a light pole about a tenants' meeting. I snapped a photo and made a note to go. Surviving is personal, but staying is collective. The pharmacy hummed. Reggie was short one body, and without ceremony the man from the bus walked in, clean shirt, receipt corner in hand. He looked different standing under fluorescent lights, not smaller, not bigger, just seen. Reggie squinted at the scrap, then at me. I lifted a shoulder. "He moves quick," I said. Reggie shrugged. "We'll see." 2 hours later, the man was matching pace, double counting without being told, and I caught Reggie watching him with the grudging respect he gives to competence. On break, the man sat next to me on the crate. "Name's Andre," he offered. I said mine back. "You saved me a day," he said. "We're all returning favors," I answered. We bumped fists like a contract. At 3:00 a.m. The quiet came the kind that lets your mind wander into rooms you've been afraid to enter. I stood between shelves of vitamins and thought about miracles. I used to think they were lightning bolts loud, rare, blinding. Lately they felt more like gears small, precise, turning together until stuck things move. A clerk who rushes a note, a supervisor who flags a file, a bus driver who looks the other way for a second while kindness taps a card, a Reggie who pays fare, a Rivera who calls back, a sister who shows up with groceries and a plan, a boy who puts 2 quarters into a future he can't yet spell, a God who threads it all, unseen but undeniable. Dawn painted the street in forgiving colors. I walked home slower than usual, letting the city bless me block by block. Upstairs, the key turned the smallest miracle every time. The door breathed like it was glad to see me. I pinned the tenant's meeting photo to the fridge under the magnet that used to hold overdue notices and now held next steps. Then I sat at the table and wrote a new line at the bottom of the house rules. When lifted, reach back. I underlined it once and smiled, because it wasn't advice anymore, it was a habit forming. Like a new leaf deciding it was finally safe to unfurl. Monday came dressed like a verdict, but I met it like a worker, folder packed, shirt clean, breath steady. I rode the A with my knee bouncing in time to a prayer I kept simple on purpose. Let the right eyes see. Let the right words land. Let me stand. At housing, the lobby had its usual weather humid with worry, but when I asked for Rivera, the guard waved me through like we'd rehearsed this. Rivera met me at the window with that level gaze that makes panic forget its lines. You brought what I asked? She said. I laid it out like communion. 3 stubs. The letter on pharmacy letterhead. The clinic's note confirming care. The church's confirmation. She flipped, stamped, typed, and then paused, hands hovering, decision heavy in the air like thunder without the sound. There's a viewing, she said. Next door, 4th floor. Long-term unit. It's small but proper. You'll meet the building manager, Miss CHU. If she signs off and your file clears, we can move fast. I didn't trust my knees to celebrate, so I let my voice say thank you twice and followed the hallway arrows to a door that might as well have had our names taped to it in invisible ink. Ms. CHU opened with the kind of efficient kindness you only get from someone who has seen everything and still believes in people. We walked the space 2 rooms, a real bedroom door that closed without complaining, windows that faced a patch of sky, a kitchen sink deep enough to baptize a bad day. You keep tidy? She asked, eyes scanning corners like a detective. We keep grateful, I said, which is another way to say the same thing. She nodded at the folder in my hands. Papers? I passed them over. She read like someone who can hear a person's life between the lines. Steady nights, caregiving, church routes, references with working phone numbers. You've had a hard month, she said without pity. Yes, ma'am, I answered without shame. You've handled it. I didn't know what to say to that, so I let silence agree for me. She set the folder down and picked up a ring of keys that might as well have been a halo. If housing clears, you can have this on the 1st, she said. It's the 23rd. 8 days. Can you bridge it? I did the math I've been memorizing. Yes, I said. We've been building the bridge. Back on the sidewalk, the cold bit my ears, but my chest was summer. I called my mother first. She cried the soft cry of women who have learned to weep in a way that waters and doesn't drown. My sister whooped in my other ear and started assigning tasks like a coach who just saw the bracket open. I'll find a second-hand bed frame. You secure the paperwork. The boy and I will pack the kitchen. I laughed, because plan is our love language now, and we speak it fluently. At the clinic, the nurse stamped an extra copy for the file you keep at home, and I thought about all the times we had nothing extra, how abundance sometimes starts as a duplicate. At the church, Pastor prayed in the doorway with his hand on my shoulder. Simple and firm. Finish this, Lord. Then he stuck a folded 20 in my palm and said, For the movers who will be your friends with strong backs. I tucked it into the future pile in my mind, already earmarked for pizza and thanks. That evening, the tenants' meeting filled the basement with the music of chairs scraping and people deciding not to be alone. I sat near the back and listened to names: Ms. Alvarez with the leak, Mr. Green organizing rides, the young couple translating for 2 elders, a woman named Darlene passing around a sign-up sheet for a mutual aid pantry shelf in the lobby. I raised my hand and introduced myself without the old flinch. New to the building. Night worker. Caregiver. Willing hands. Heads nodded. Darlene smiled. "Welcome," she said. "We're stronger when we know who to call." I put my number on 2 sheets. Setup crew, wellness checks. Before the night shift, I walked my mother over to see the unit from the hallway couldn't go in, but sometimes seeing the door is enough to keep faith fed. She touched the number plate like it could feel her pulse. "Soon," she whispered to it and to herself and to the one who learned our address faster than the mail. "Back home." I added a date to the fridge calendar. First, move, and drew a small box around it like a frame around a dream that had finally agreed to hold still. The pharmacy felt lighter on my shoulders that night, like when you've been carrying 2 bags and someone finally takes one without making a speech. Reggie caught the shift in my stride. "Good news?" he asked. "Potential," I answered. He smirked. "Potential is news." Andre from the bus moved beside me like we'd always worked in tandem, and on break he showed me a picture of his daughter, gap-toothed, victorious with a jump rope. "Her mom let me take her Saturday," he said, pride covering the whole sentence. I handed him a bottle of water and said the thing men don't get to hear enough in fluorescent spaces. "You're doing good." At 3, the quiet asked me to name what I was feeling, and for once the answer wasn't fear or hunger or hustle. It was arrival not at the finish line, but at a place where the ground beneath me matched the weight I was carrying. I thought about Chapter 1 me, packing 2 bags in the dark, and I wanted to reach back through time and put a key in his hand. "Keep going," I would tell him. "The floor is building itself under your feet." I stocked 3 more shelves with that in my chest and felt the scanner. Beep sync with my breathing work and worship sharing a tempo. Dawn found me at the window seat on the bus, chin against the cool glass, watching the city practice being tender. When I unlocked our door, the room lifted to meet me. The plant had pushed out a second new leaf like an exclamation point, and the house rules page fluttered a little in the heat's draft as if applauding. I opened the lockbox, fed the future pile, and then took out a pen to write a new line at the bottom of the page that's been writing me back. When a door opens, carry someone through the frame. I underlined it, then set the pen down and allowed myself exactly 30 seconds of closing my eyes and seeing us in that new room bed made. Rent receipt on the counter, my mother's laugh echoing off paint that didn't remember other people's arguments. 30 seconds was enough to make it real and not so much that it hurt to return. I opened my eyes to this room, this breath, this chapter, and whispered what has become the hinge of my days. Make room. The rest is on its way. The first came like a text at 8:07 a.m., simple and official enough to make my hand shake. Approved. Lease signing Thursday. Keys upon signature. I read it twice, then out loud to my mother, and she pressed her palms together the way she does when thank you needs a posture. We didn't shout. We didn't run. We stood still and let the news find every corner of us that had been bracing for a different sentence. Then we moved phone calls, confirmations, my sister launching into logistics like a symphony conductor with grocery store flyers for sheet music, my nephew practicing first of the month like it was a holiday. Thursday. The pen felt heavier than its weight because it was writing the end of one wilderness and the beginning of a garden. Ms. CHU slid papers. Across with the efficiency of a woman who knows ink can be mercy when the math holds. I signed my name like I was building a bridge with letters. My mother added hers with that same slow pride, a loop for every mile we'd walked. Rivera stopped by the office doorway just to nod, as if to say, "I saw where you started. I wanted to see where you landed." Then Miss CHU placed the keys in my palm too on a ring, metal cool as river water, and for a second I felt every locked door in my past turn soft. We carried the first box together because beginnings deserve witness. The new place smelled like fresh paint and quiet. The bedroom door closed and opened without complaint, and my mother tried it twice like she was checking a heartbeat. I set the lockbox on the counter and opened it like a little ceremony, fed the future pile. Then took one bill out and taped it to the inside of the cabinet with a date and a promise. First month ahead, coming soon. My sister appeared with a second-hand bed frame and the kind of laugh that makes work feel like play. And we built a room with Allen wrenches and inside jokes. My nephew lined up his cars along the baseboard and christened each room with a loop around the doorway, announcing them open for business. The miracle didn't stop at the lease. It showed up when Andre texted me a photo of his first official schedule, no more day-to-day, and wrote, "We in." It showed when Louise handed me a coffee and said, "Housewarming," like the city itself had decided to bless the threshold. It showed when pastor and 2 deacons carried a donated dresser up 4 flights without panting and left 20 minutes later like it was nothing, which is how real gifts behave. It showed when Ms. Darlene from the tenants committee knocked with a welcome mat and a list of building quirks only insiders share. It showed when my mother's pillbox fit perfectly in the new cabinet, like the unit had been measured for her medicines and her grace. That first night, we ate takeout on the floor because chairs can wait when joy is hot. We prayed not with fear, but with fullness, thanking God for every gear that turned when our hands were too tired to crank, for every person who answered when we knocked in the dark, for every small yes that braided itself into this big one. I stepped into the hallway with a trash bag and the intention to breathe, and Miss Seatrue passed with her keys jangling like a familiar song. "You landed," she said. "We landed," I answered, and meant the "we" to include more than the 4 names on our mailbox. Before bed, I hung the house rules on a fresh nail beside the door, ironed flat with tape and love. Then I added the last line I didn't know I'd been writing toward since the stairwell lesson. "Miracles have hands. Use yours." I underlined it once, not to shout, but to seal. I lay down on a real bed in a room that knew our names, and the city outside did what cities do: sirens and laughter and late buses. But inside, we had a weather system of our own, steady, warm, possible. In the morning, sunlight slid across the wall and drew a gold stripe like it had in the old place, only this time it didn't feel like an underline. It felt like a doorway. I stood in it and thought about the boy on the bus, the inspection paper, the plant with its stubborn leaves, the lockbox with 4 piles, and a future that finally looked like a plan instead of a dare. I thought about the night I packed 2 bags and made room, not sure for what. Now I know. Room for keys, for names, for neighbors, for work that hums and pays, for a table that seats more than fear, for a story that doesn't end at almost. If there's a sermon in all this, and there is, it's not that trouble won't come. It's that when it does, don't stop making room. Answer the call. Keep the papers tight. Count the small mercies like cash. Let people help. Help people back. Pray like it's oxygen and work like the answer already left the warehouse and is on the truck with your address on it. One day, a Tuesday or a Thursday or a day with no name, the floor will stop disappearing. The door will breathe. The key will fit. And you'll stand in a room that says out loud what you've been whispering to yourself in the dark. We're home.